Hey, everybody. So that wasn't quite the scene in downtown Chicago last night, although I can say that it kind of was, unfortunately, kind of the scene in many of our outlying suburbs.
It was.
To make light of the situation, but that's from Day of Destruction, a really awful B-grade made-for-TV disaster movie featuring Randy Quaid.
Randy Quaid, yes.
Poor Tornado Tommy. I just hope there were no storm chasers last night that ended up with the same fate. I have to say, Lainie, thank you for joining me tonight. As I was on my way home last night, my sister texted me right as I left her house in Wilmette, and she said, "You got to hurry up home. Like storm warnings just popped up," and this was around 10:30 on her iPhone. And of course, the instinct in me is like, "Where is it?" Because I want to go see it. And she's like, "You're out of your mind." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. There's like." I get an adrenaline rush when these storms happen. I know that's probably a little bit crazy, but
no, I love storms. I mean, I absolutely love them. And I've got a back patio that is really well constructed. And so I will actually just, go out. And if it's safe to do so, I'll go out and enjoy the storm. I did that a little bit last night, but then I decided it was best to get in with the tornado warning.
Well, I was in my Jeep and I stopped, and I mean, the rain was crazy. And I was at, I think, Tui and right off the expressway, but I just kind of parked and watched. I'm thinking, should I like drive down Southwest and look for this stuff? But I guess a cooler head a more reasonable head prevailed, and I ended up actually I went to my health club because it was 24/7, and I did some swimming while the rain was battering everybody outside. But
you were getting wet, but it was in an intentional way,
in a safe way.
Yeah, in a safe way, absolutely.
So I did see the Tribune front page today, though, and it was very very sad to see so much of the devastation and damage that did happen across some of, I think it was north and south suburbs, I believe.
Yeah, and there was, I know I heard from somebody in Aurora said their power went out. It was actually quite scary here. We didn't have the devastation certainly that we had. I think it was last year when there was that tornado that came down in Rogers Park, but it was pretty nuts.
Yeah, I was almost kind of expecting last night. I was wondering if we were going to see that happen in Rogers Park again, because I was remembering what happened last year. And as we were prepping for tonight's show, we didn't just like rush on tonight to do disaster preparedness because it happened last night. Lainie pitched this last week because there were other things happening. I don't know if it was kind of inspired also by the fact that there was the earthquake downstate, which is a disaster related also, but you really had the foresight to recognize this is probably an important public safety segment that we should do here on Chicago Corner tonight.
We had that also, that really hot day. And it did occur to me that this would be a great time to do a Chicago specific show on potential things that can happen over the summer, disasters and emergencies. And as many people who know of my work on Civically Minded and actually on previous Chicago Corners, I've got a very strong interest in community preparedness. I will make a note of saying here that I'm only speaking for myself here. They're in the show notes. There are links to authoritative sources, which I encourage everybody to check out and to read. But to understand, I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for any other organization. But I will say what I'm going to tell you is very consistent with anything that you would be hearing from the Red Cross, FEMA, local emergency management offices. Everything that I'm going to be telling you is fully in line with that. But kind of moving into it. So I think in Chicago, we have historically kind of recognized that our weather sucks because it's either cold and wet or hot and humid. But we don't really have the huge risks of things like earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, wildfires, that sort of thing. However, there have been changes in Chicago's weather. And if you look at some of the material online about this, Chicago weather is getting hotter, for example, in the summer. It is, it's wetter. And that's creating its own challenges. So I wanted to talk a little bit of some of the things that people should be aware of in Chicago to be prepared for, because what people don't necessarily understand, particularly if you live in a huge city like Chicago that has a huge network of services, is that by definition, that disasters are events that strain available resources. And even in situations where you have a pretty well-prepared city like Chicago, if a major disaster happens, it doesn't matter how well prepared we are. There's going to be strains on the system that means that people should be as prepared as possible so they can take care of themselves, their families, and their neighbors until professionals can come in and help get things sorted out and we can get back to normal. So I wanted to talk a little bit. Go on.
Well, no, I just wanted to comment. I just pulled up on screen the show notes that are linked below for everybody to see. You really did a tremendously thorough preparation here, that when people do visit the show notes, there are links, and I'm scrolling this part on the page where people can click through and access these resources that you're sharing with us right now, which will factor into, everything that you cover here in this particular segment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also want to point out that if you go to ready.gov, that's FEMA's site. It's a really excellent site on preparedness. The Chicago Office of Emergency Management, they've got a lot of location-specific things. But I do want to point out that I'm speaking of resources, plans, programs in Chicago specifically. If you are in the suburbs or outside of Chicago, you will want to look and see what is available in your area, what the policies are, what services are available, because they may not be the same as those that are in Chicago. But
it's regional.
Yeah, it's regional.
How different areas are affected.
And municipal as well, because it depends on the government that you're under. But let's just start getting into it. So what are the summer weather-related disasters we're inclined to have here in Chicago? Well, first, of course, is heat. And we do tend to get heat with humidity. It's not, people like to say, well, it's a dry heat, which is supposed to make everything okay. And that actually can be nice. But these hot, humid days that we get and nights, it's like the heat doesn't go away. And you can feel a lot hotter than it actually is outside. So they're incredibly uncomfortable, and they can be incredibly dangerous. And the heat is rising. Summer temperatures are rising in Chicago. And so it's important, for example, to be extremely aware of how comfortable one is. Are you thirsty? Are you having shortness of breath? Is your heart racing? Because the symptoms of heat exhaustion going into heat stroke are not always as clear cut. And when you talk to people who have actually had heat stroke and who have survived, they may even tell you, well, actually, when I went into heat stroke, I thought I felt fine. I thought I was getting better. And it was because people around them realized that something was wrong, that they were able to get the attention that they needed. But it's a very serious condition. Now, in Chicago, we do have cooling centers around the city. And in some cases, what they will also do is what they've done in addition to like churches or government buildings that are cooling centers, they will also send out CTA buses with air conditioning into locations. Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and you can find out where those are, and people who are ill or people who are elderly can go and sit in the buses for a while and, to cool themselves down, and they'll have volunteers there with water and things that are necessary to, to keep people relatively cool. So those services are available. But this is one of those areas where we know that it's very important for neighbors, families, and friends to check in on each other. If you all will recall, back in 1995, we had that massive heat wave that killed so many people. And when they did an analysis of who died, they found that a lot of people who died, they were men, and they were often men who were isolated. They didn't have family who were checking in on them. So there was that sense of isolation. They pointed out that there had been a heat wave, probably something like maybe 50 years before, something like that. But back then, people felt safe enough to go sleep in the public parks at night. And that didn't happen in 95. And there were a lot of people who were socially isolated. There were a number of missteps that led to the deaths. But
We
essentially,
hear about that every year too.
Yeah.
Always checking in on your neighbors, how important it is, especially seniors and people who are isolated, as you're talking about, to check in on them if you know that they live around you.
And I want to bring something up as well. If you're checking on friends and family using your phone, and a lot of people may still be doing that because we still are in a pandemic at this time, keep in mind that if you're calling people who are outside of Chicago, and you talk to somebody on the phone, that you're talking to an elderly relative, and they sound like they're really struggling, and you want to call for help for them, keep in mind that if you call for 911 in Chicago, and that person is outside of Chicago, 911 here in Chicago cannot help you, and they can't patch you through to another 911 call center. They're not set up for that. What they will tell you to do is hang up the phone and Google the emergency services number for the community where your loved one lives. Yeah. This happened to a friend of mine recently. And so her suggestion is, if you have family and friends that you are checking on regularly and they're outside of where you live, prepare. Actually look up the emergency services number, the direct emergency services number for that community, and put it into your cell phone, write it in your phone book. And so you have it right there. So when you're checking in on people, you have the capacity to call and get them help.
This has to do with the geo-tracking on a phone. If I'm calling, for example, I'm here in Westridge, Rogers Park, and I call 911 for my family in Wilmette, that my 911 on my phone that's linked to my geo-tracking on my phone because of where I'm at is not going to connect me with 911 in Wilmette. So that's how all that works. Right,
exactly. And people don't think about it. And I'm sad about the system being the way it is, because 911 centers are not, at least out in Chicago, they're not connected to the internet or these systems that have this kind of connectivity, in part because for security reasons. Yeah. A hacker could go in and take out the whole system. So they have that, but they don't really have the ability to provide direct assistance to panicked loved ones who are trying to get help for somebody who they suspect is sick or is having a stroke or something like that. So I would advise that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The other real issue here is thunderstorms. As we know, those can be incredibly dangerous, and it's easy they can come on very quickly. If there's going to be a heat wave coming on, you're going to hear about it. You're going to know about it. And you can sometimes, you will certainly get predictions of thunderstorms and rain, but they're a lot more volatile. And, you can have something that seems okay 1 minute, and then you've got hail coming down like this.
So, and this is because of the sudden temperature changes too within. Yeah. We were talking about this before the show. It's kind of like, from a historical context, I think is very interesting. This weekend, hot and humid, and I was out with a friend, and my t-shirt, light clothing, and I said, you look at photographs of people from the 1920s and 30s and layered clothes, and the clothing was made out of wool, and you can't imagine how did people, because they were so formal back then, dress in layers and heavy fabrics. And she said to me, well, it wasn't this hot back then. We lose track of the fact that what we're dealing with right now with global warming and climate change is such a result of how industry and the Industrial Revolution from the 1900s forward completely have affected our climate and our atmosphere with pollutants and accelerating the global warming. So the heat and the humidity that we deal with now, if you want to go out and look all formal, you can't because it's so hot. It's because things back then were cooler. That's why people dress that way. So I just found it fascinating from a historical perspective, because I'm always a big fan of like the 20s and 30s. But when I see pictures, I'm like, man, I wish we could dress that way again. But it's just, how did they manage? And that's the reason. Climate was very, very different back then, especially in Chicago, where we've got the lake boarding us, where we have these quick shifts in temperature. And go into that a little bit, because you were talking about that a little bit before the show.
Well,
in fact, when you're a large body of water, and how that has a lot of effect on our tornadoes and
well, the question there's been some debate. I will say this: in recent years, there has been some debate as to why urban areas don't often get hit by tornadoes. And some have argued, well, for example, Chicago's not going to get hit by too many tornadoes because of the lake. And some of the assumptions that have been around are currently being challenged, but I don't think the science is really in on that at that point. However, we have, again, We don't get huge numbers of tornadoes or terribly destructive tornadoes, but we had one. We had the one in Rogers Park. Now we just had
last year
this
was
very
crazy.
nasty one. Yeah, we had this very nasty one, and it's only June. And we know that hot weather, that kind of hot, muggy weather can definitely be tornado weather. And again, tornadoes, they form and they form quickly. I was listening to some people, out in Woodbridge and in that area, and they were saying, they had maybe 30-second warning. They didn't get to the basement until after the tornado hit.
Yeah.
And it was very, very fast. And there's not necessarily a whole lot that people can do other than to try and, first of all, understand if the weather conditions are right, you will get a tornado watch. And that I would say we need to start taking tornado watches a lot more seriously.
Yeah.
When the tornado watch comes in, okay, that's the time to check your go bag. It's the time to get the family together so that if you have to move to a safer area, you can do so.
Talk about the go bag, because I have a go bag in my car just for when I travel. If I know that I'm going to end up staying somewhere, I've got, my overnight supplies, but beyond just like having toiletries for a bathroom. I don't know if many people know what a go bag is.
Well, I actually have that on my list here of notes to be things to talk about. I'm just kind of going right now, just what we might assume, and then we'll go into specific preparations.
I will shut up.
No, not at all. And because it's an important thing, and we'll talk about go bags and we'll talk about 72-hour kits because people get them really confused. The other thing that we have is flooding, and we know that flooding is a serious issue here in Chicago. I remember a couple years back, I think there was this tremendous flooding, and there was water coming off Lake Michigan, and there were residential homes that were getting battered. And the thing is, floods can also come in quickly after tornadoes. So, which is why I'm going to talk about remaining informed during disasters, because you may have to act quickly, because usually disasters will come in clumps. You have this thunderstorm, you have massive heat, then you have a thunderstorm, then you have a tornado, and then there's flash flooding, and you've gone into the basement to escape the tornado, and now you've got a flood. Well, that's not where you want to be. So last night, at one point, where I was, I had a tornado warning, I had a thunderstorm warning, and a flood warning, all coming in at the same time.
Triple threat.
Over my phone, over my weather alert radio, which I will show you, over my Apple Watch, over my Amazon Echo. It was all coming in at the same time. The other thing that I want to point out is with the heat, and I talked about this last week on my national show, the real danger, one of the dangers with the heat is that it can lead to food spoilage very quickly. And that adds another layer, because let's say the power goes out, it's really hot. And again, I had some friends in Rogers Park whose power was out for like 3 days. And these folks, again, they had to be very careful, because with that heat, there was a greater risk of food poisoning. The food warms up a lot more quickly. And now you've got all these other disasters going on. People are reeling from that, trying to come back from that. And now you've got people with food poisoning. It just adds, it's layer after layer of problem. Sure. And people need to understand that. Also, it can lead to, again, the heat stroke, heat exhaustion, further making it more difficult for a community to be resilient and to bounce back. Also, I just want to mention a couple of non-weather related summer threats. One is civil unrest. We did have this last year. And, we'll see what happens this year. But I would point out also in hot weather, people are outside. If it's really hot, they start to get cranky. There appears to be an alcohol connection, that people are outside, it's hot, and they're drinking. And that all, creates a perfect storm for people to,
unintended.
Yeah, exactly. For people to act up. So there is that real risk. And you're going to have that here in a city like Chicago. There is the possibility of terrorist activity. We don't really have that problem here in Chicago. We have not had that problem, but it is something that everybody needs to be aware of, particularly in major urban centers. You don't know what's going to happen. There's also, yeah, we have been. There's also, again, the real possibility of a ransomware and cyber attacks on things like power grids, 911 services, hospitals. That hospitals are a favorite target of the ransomware criminals.
We've already been seeing it happen. I think it was over on the East Coast. What was the last one that happened? Was it the East Coast? No, what was it with the God?
I don't remember because there's been several of them.
But just I think in recent, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, the government had to pay some money out for ransomware to get things back going. So it's amazing how that threat is emerging now.
Well, it is, and the thing is, if you really want to do some damage, if you are a bad person who wants to do some damage, you wait until a community is dealing with a tornado or some kind of issue, and then you come in with a ransomware attack where people are desperate and you're really trying to do as much damage as possible. And by the way, most people in disasters, the people who have studied disaster management and emergencies will tell you that the average person out there, no, they do not try to make things worse. People actually come together, communities come together, they support each other. There are outliers, but usually communities support each other. People will look out for each other, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to have somebody who on the outside who might take advantage. But people just need to be aware of this. So as I'm getting into preparation, and now we understand the threats, what are some of the preparations here you can put into place? And the first principle I want to put in here is do not over rely on technology. All of your plans and preparations should be created with an assumption that power, cell towers, and the internet are not available.
Right.
We know that this is an issue. This is why ham radio operators have field days throughout the years, because people, governments, people still rely on ham radio operators to transmit messages and support communications around the country, for the simple reason that the other communication methods are so fragile. And it's very difficult to interfere with radio waves. So that's that's why we have the ham radio community that actively is that is mobilized whenever there's any kind of a disaster. But people tend to rely way too much on their phones. They rely too much on the internet, and then when the power goes down and the cell towers go down and the internet goes down, they have nothing. And sometimes they don't even have, say, for example, an antenna TV or a radio where they could tune into a local station, and they are essentially isolated at that point. So whenever you're making your plans, assume you don't have power, assume you don't have technology, beyond, say, a battery operated radio. So that's one thing to be aware of. Number two, think redundancy. There's a saying in the so-called prepper community, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. The idea is that items break down, they spoil, something goes wrong, or you are going to be called upon to help out your neighbors. So try to consider duplicating your supplies. Have a couple of first aid kits, for example. Have multiple radios. We'll talk about that in a bit. When it comes to your food and water supplies with your food, you're going to want to have some ready-to-eat things. Like trail mix, granola bars, beef jerky, kipper snacks. And then you can have some heat and eat stuff and even some freeze-dried stuff if you want. But you don't want to count on having the ability to cook things, for example. So you want to be redundant there. You should have a supply of bottled water. I usually recommend a gallon of water in storage per person per day. And it also goes for pets as well, because you have a gallon of water a day per person, per pet. That's for drinking, possibly cooking with, and as well as hygiene. But you want to have the bottled water, but you should also have some water purification tablets, or some bleach, or a filtration system that's capable of removing microbes from water. Your Brita pitcher at home is not designed to make water from a pond or a lake or a stream safe to drink. It's designed to make the tap water, which has already been treated, taste better. But there are things like the Life Straw. There are like the Big Berkey water systems that if you, say, live near a pond or a lake, or a stream, you can get the water out of there. You can put it into one of these systems, and it will create safe to drink water. But again, that's just something else to consider: is being very redundant and being aware of any eventuality. Now, for me, one of the key things, and if you read some of the articles that I've linked to in here, the key thing when it comes to emergencies and disasters is notification. Now, in Chicago, we have sirens. They were put in after the Cold War, and in Chicago, we have kept these sirens. A lot of communities have decommissioned theirs after post-Cold War. We still have them. But outdoor sirens were meant to be heard by people outside. And they're not designed for people who are indoors to hear. And of course, many people can't hear. I mean, they may be deaf or hard of hearing. A lot of people are wearing earbuds. People might be are heavy sleepers. So the air raid sirens are that's what my grandmother used to call them, the air raid sirens. They're
That's
fantastic.
what they sound like.
Yeah, and that's what they were. But they're fantastic. But they have a specific purpose, and that's alerting people who are outdoors. And what disaster management professionals and meteorologists recommend is having as many different ways of getting notifications as possible. So if you have a smartphone, yeah, sure, go ahead.
If I can answer that. No, smartphones, I think, are what people rely on. My father got me and my siblings this like emergency radio that we plug into the wall. And, we always kind of tease him a little bit that he's always into gadgets and these things because he's expecting the worst. But I did end up plugging the thing into my kitchen, and that's exactly what I've got. That's it. I've got that in my kitchen, and it's crazy because even when you're looking out your window and everything looks fine outside, weather looks fine, the light is normal, I hear that thing go off in my kitchen, and literally within 5 minutes or so, it gets dark outside because you hear the meh. This is a Cook County warning to all residents of the Cook County area.
Yep.
And it really is a great, if you don't have your cell phone close, if you've got one of these installed in your home, it operates on a radio frequency as long as it's plugged into the wall. Mm-hmm. It will pick up the emergency broadcasts for, wherever you are in whatever community. And it's localized. So actually, you'll sometimes get an alert for other communities, but that's okay because it's like looking at, I think I want to say Tri-County area whenever I hear something, especially since
you can program it. But what this is it's in. So the National Weather Service actually has its own radio network, and it's on its own band called the Weather Band. And at most radios don't get the weather band. You have to get a radio that is specifically on the weather band. And there are many different types of radios that pick that up. And it's a computerized voice. And it basically, the National Weather Service also receives the emergency alert system tones, letting the NWS know, in which they can then give the information to us of any kind of disaster or hazard. It's not just weather. Now, if you turn this weather on this radio on normally, you're
so prepared. You had it ready there. I didn't even realize you had that ready, and I didn't mean to jump the gun on it. But I'm glad you had it to show people.
I'm glad you brought it up, because what this particular radio does is it acts like a smoke detector or a carbon monoxide detector for anything that's going wrong. And it's not just weather related. Now, if you push the button on that and you want to listen to the radio broadcast, it's 24/7. Very useful information, gives you detailed weather reports, including nautical maritime reports. So if you like to swim or boat or surf or whatever, it's great. But the National Weather Service has these radio stations all over the country. And with the weather alert radio, you can you plug it into the wall. It has battery backup, but you have to plug it in the wall because it's always on standby as long as you have it turned on. And when the tones come through, there's a disaster, which could be an avalanche, could be a wildfire, it could be a chemical spill, it could be that we're getting nuked. That message will come through, and then you'll be given the information about what you need to do. The other nifty thing about this is that it's got a little a display on it, LED display, and it will display in English, French, or Spanish. In the U.S., our weather services often have Spanish stations as well as English stations. In Canada, where you can also use these, I think it's in Montreal or in Quebec, you can also get French language broadcasts. But this display, regardless of where you are, whether there is a Spanish or a French station, will give you the nature of the disaster, spell it out for you in French, English, or Spanish. And then there's also little lights that will let you know, well, is this a warning? Is this a watch? Is it an advisory? And so even if a person doesn't speak good English or does not speak Spanish or French, they can look at this and they can see by the color that the degree of the emergency. And then they're going to be able to, contact a family member to find out what's happening, or turn on a TV or radio station that's in their own language to get the information. So it's got some great design features. It also has a port
tool to have in the home.
You can actually have it connected. Let's say somebody in your home is deaf or hard of hearing. You can actually plug an adaptive device in there that will shine a light or rock a bed. So if somebody can't hear, this will also be able can notify them if you plug it in to an adaptive device. So these things are $30. Now, the funny thing is, when I was doing my research for this show, they're now doing giveaways in many communities of these radios. Oh. They're buying. They're just some in Indiana. They're all over the place. They've now come to realize our systems need this older technology, radio technology, because the newer systems, they're fantastic. And don't get me wrong, they're absolutely fantastic, but they're fragile. And if you have
a Wi-Fi outage in your home, or we were talking about before, ransomware attacks, they can interfere with a radio signal that's sending information to these devices. And I think you can get them at Home Depot, Menards. You can probably find them on Amazon.
Amazon has them at some very good prices.
Yeah, good investment.
And I do recommend these, and I'm going to talk in a second. I'll talk a little bit about what's going on here, because that is a weather alert radio. It is designed to be plugged into a wall. It's got battery backup, but the battery backup is for 6 hours of continuous streaming, or three days on standby, assuming that the batteries are at full power. Okay. The thing of it is, though, is that you should not rely on it as an emergency radio, because it does rely on either battery or electrical power sources. What you would want to get is something like this. And they've got these in a variety of sizes. These are emergency radios. And in this case, yes, it will go to the weather band. It will go to shortwave AM, FM, which is great, because sometimes those weather service transmitters will get knocked out as well. So you always want to be able to get in touch with an AM, FM station anywhere in your area. They'll have information for you as well. This has a solar panel. It's got a hand crank that you can use to charge it. That way you can plug your cell phone, USB code, and charge your cell phone manually through this. So even if you don't have any batteries, if it's not charged up, you can manually charge it using the crank, using the solar panel. It's even got a flashlight on it. It's fantastic. So by having an emergency radio, an emergency alert radio, you're probably going to be covered, even if power grid goes down, even if standard communications go down.
Those hand crank radios are really cool, especially if a battery ends up going out.
Yeah, and there's some cheap ones that are under $20. I mean, this one's kind of a primo one, because I kind of a geek this way, but you can get one of those, and an emergency alert radio. It will be probably under $50 for the two of them, and it's a good investment, because it's very difficult to interfere with radio signals. It's going to be a solar flare, something like that. Yeah. That's what's going to happen. So I just want to bring that up. But you should also be signed up with text services. For example, both Cook County and City of Chicago have text-based and email-based alert services, in addition to whatever's coming through from your phone company. And many phone companies do participate in this and will send you alerts, and they will even override, even if you're on silent mode or do not disturb, they'll override that but the city and county will also send you text messages. Those systems aren't perfect either. But again, if you're getting multiple messages from multiple sources, you have a weather alert, you have your smart device set up to let you know what's going on, there's a good chance you're going to get the information that you need to be alert and take action. And in case there's a really devastating situation, you can continue to get information. Is there an evacuation? Are the rescue crews coming to your area? Is there a boil order? Because after disasters, sometimes water systems get damaged. So this is all, it's before, during, and after. When you have that information, you're in a much better spot.
Very, very thorough.
Yeah. So, again, we're gonna go. We're going a little past a half an hour here, but I've got some details in here.
I can stay in longer. I'm not in. If people are with us, we can go.
We have some other stories as well. Sure. But I think you want to develop personal, workplace, and household plans. Again, when I grew up, I don't know about you, but my parents would run fire drills in our home. And they would set off the alarm, and I think that got my stepsister in the shower twice. They didn't mean to do it, but that's what ended up happening. But we had a plan, okay, we didn't have cell phones back then. We would run out of the house and we would meet in front unless it was too dangerous. And in that case, we would meet on the front porch of our neighbors so that we could all be accounted for. You can do the same thing. I live in a building where there is a basement, but the basement is accessible only through outside. So there was a tornado. Okay, I need to be prepared to get down there very quickly. What do I need to ensure that I can be down there in 15 seconds? There it is. The other thing that you will want to get, and we had this happen not so long ago, we had a 911 outage in Chicago.
I never knew this.
And the message came through my radio.
Do you know what caused it? What would cause a 911 outage?
I don't know, but it happened, and I want to say it was here. I can swear it happened here, but it does happen. 911 goes down. There is a full regular phone number that you can call, but it's going to depend on, for example, the police district that you're in. So I've got a link here in Chicago, how to find your police district through the chicagopolice.org. You can plug in your address and you'll know what your district is, and you can get a full phone number from them. Have that on your fridge, have that on your phone, have it in your phone book, so that if the 911 goes down, you have another number that you can call to get help. You also want to have, as I said before, get those emergency numbers for family and friends who are outside Chicago who you suspect may need some help at some point. It's good for you to have that information along with their physical addresses so you can get them help. You will also want things like insurance information, prescription information, medical provider information. Fortunately, ready.gov, which is FEMA, has printables. They have PDF printables that you can print out, put into a binder, or have them in your go bag or something along those lines. And so that you have access to physical copies of this information. So even if your phone goes down and you have no juice to get it back up again, you'll have all the information that you need. So there are some principles right there. As I mentioned before, household preparations, you want to make sure that you can stay comfortable as possible before help can come to you. Now, what you'll hear a lot from government agencies is the 72-hour kit. And the idea is this, that after a disaster, it's going to take at least 72 hours for emergency and disaster management organizations, charities, governments, whatnot, to get up and running. Keep in mind that they have to protect their professionals just as we all need to be as safe as possible. So if there's an issue like something like I hate to, God forbid, somebody sets off a improvised nuclear device, something that's a chemical bomb or something like that, what can happen is that the area that has been contaminated is so contaminated, no help can arrive because they've got to keep They've got to keep their people safe until the area is safe to enter, because you can't be just sacrificing all of your trained professionals to a dangerous situation. You may have infrastructure maybe down there, maybe power lines down. And so people need to be prepared to stay in their own homes for at least 72 hours without assistance. So again, we're talking things like, food, water, medicine, but also things that you might need to be comfortable. Do you have books and magazines, cards, games? In disaster and emergency management planning, what I found is there's a huge emphasis on psychological well-being. You would think that they would be saying, well, just suck it up. There's a problem. There's a disaster. Suck it up. Well, you're already sucking it up. You're already experiencing this disaster. So whatever you can do to keep you, your pets, your families, and your neighbors safe and as comfortable as possible is great. You also asked about go bags. Go bag is when you have to literally get up and go. And this is different from your 72-hour kit in the sense that that if you are called upon to evacuate, you are going to need to move quickly. And so this is a bag. Ideally, you want one for every family member. You also want them for your pets. And there are companies that sell pet go bags that include a kennel, collapsible water bowls, food, water, everything, in these bags. And so you're going to want to be able to pick up and take with you the things that you may need as you evacuate or have to move someplace that's more safe. And we've got lists on here of things that you can include in those go bags. It's going to be customized to each person. But again, you're going to want, a change of clothes, basic hygiene, food and water as you can possibly get it. Again, an AM/FM radio that's battery powered is going to be real helpful. And also the copies of important documents, including insurance information, your house title. One of the things is if people are evacuated, it doesn't happen that often, but if people are evacuated, and you want to get back into your home, and they're going to have National Guard there guarding the homes to protect them against looting, you're going to have to be able to show ID to get back into your home. So having your ID up to date is great, but you may also want utility bills, a copy of your lease, a copy of your mortgage, and that's going to make things a lot smoother when you're able to return. So these are the kinds of things that you can put into your go bag. Again, though, I've got a full list. There's a full list here of information for you. I've also got links to stuff from Cook County and Chicago on cooling centers, summer safety, the particular risks here in Chicago. And I urge folks from Chicago to check this out because there's a lot that's going on here. But when it comes down to it, is individuals need to be as responsible as possible for themselves, their family, and their neighbors.
Absolutely. Man, very thorough.
So in any case, I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have either now or later, and I will answer to the best of my ability. But I think I've given a fair amount of information here. I even have a little article that I wrote about emergency radios. But as I said, I think it's just we're at a point now where there's enough changes and there's enough volatility in the weather, also socially, that being prepared to stay at home and not have outside assistance, at least for a short period of time, is going to be important.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, want to move on?
Well,
or do you have any questions?
I would say I'm looking in the live chat to bring up any questions, but I don't know what more people could ask given how thorough you were about things. There were some people mentioning, I think it was, let me scroll back here, Unknown Space Pioneer, who gave some good suggestions about, how to think when you're packing a go bag. It's like you're thinking about camping, and living in a backpack. But no, I think I've covered it better than anyone else could. So, and again, we've got all the information down in the show resources. The link is down there. So yeah, please let's
I do want to mention one thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah. What I have heard from disaster management professionals is they've said that a lot of efforts to get people to prepare for disasters and emergencies have failed in the United States. largely because preparation is incredibly personal. What you need, your needs are going to be different from your neighbors. It's going to depend on things like, do you have a car or not? How old are the people in your family? Is somebody pregnant? Do you have small children? Do you have people with disabilities? Do you have people with medical issues? Do you have pets? And so what I urge people to do is to consider, you have to consider what goes on in your own family and your own household. You may even want to take a little notepad with you, for a couple of days, and just write down the things that you use, the things that you rely on, whether, the medications and things that, household goods and whatnot. What are those things that you've come to rely on that could be in short supply or that you may be separated from in case of an emergency? And that might be good things to put into a go bag or to have in your emergency kit at home. Because I don't think we always think about how much, we don't think about a lot of the conveniences that we have. And if we're relying on everything operating as normal, that's where we can find ourselves in a real pickle. So there that is.
Definitely.
Okay, I did want to mention a few other things. And this is the kind of thing I've been talking about on Civically Minded, my Thursday show and the national show. What I believe is going to be the great housing scoop, that I believe that we are going to be seeing a consolidation of real estate in the hands of, or in the claws, I should say, of hedge fund managers and whatnot. What has been happening, though, in Chicago is that there has been some new assessments. The Cook County assessor is newly doing new assessments and valuations on rental housing, in this case in Rogers Park.
And this comes as a shock because everybody thought that Kagi was really going to start assessing from a more progressively fair-minded platform with what property values are really worth. But now I was shocked when you shared this with me before the show. I'm actually pulling it up myself, but please go on because I want to kind of look at the details.
So apparently what he is claiming is that the properties have been undervalued. And what he is saying is that homeowners are subsidizing landlords, which is, I think it's a progressive talking point, certainly. And he is, there's been some massive jumps in some cases. And it appears as though, for example, according to his office, this is a direct quote from the article, the average assessment on a rental apartment building would leap an eye-popping 260%, rising to $234,914 from $65,213 in 2018. Okay, these are massive increases. And okay, he's potentially using progressive talking points. We're saying, well, homeowners shouldn't be subsidizing the landlords. However, what this could mean is that the taxes are going to really jump. On these apartments.
He was campaigning on Barrios overvaluing the properties here. Now he's saying they're undervalued. I think I recall when he ran for the assessor's office, everyone was complaining that Barrios had overvalued things. So I don't understand how they can suddenly backpedal on this.
I don't know if he was talking about single family homes or not. But the problem is that if the landlords suddenly can't pay their property taxes, and there's a chance of that happening, either they feel themselves pressured, they sell out to BlackRock or Blackstone, and
they own the real estate rental market, and they will charge everybody whatever they want. Then it's like a free for all.
And then they own land. I mean, I think that it's not just the costs; it's the fact that land is life. We can't live without land. We have this thing called gravity. We're kind of stuck here, and the other possibility is the landlords. Okay, well, we're going to raise the rent, and you're going to displace a whole lot of people. And the article makes the point that Rogers Park is a very diverse area. There's, people affordable. And you can get really nice stuff there, but it's also affordable. And this could end up either forcing out a lot of people from rental housing or result in the further consolidation of it as landlords say, forget it, I'm out of here.
Quoting from the article too, landlords could eat those increases, reducing their profits, but they also could pass them on to tenants in the form of higher rents that could heavily affect neighborhoods such as Rogers Park, which has one of the city's larger stocks of relatively affordable apartments and is racially and ethnically mixed, as we like
As
to
you
see.
and I both know, because we live in West
Yeah.
Ridge, which is adjacent to Rogers Park. And
Well, I'm also a landlord, and we managed to keep our rent low for our tenants downstairs, and we really strive to keep it low, despite the fact that property taxes are going up. And when this kind of stuff happens, it's like I don't want to raise my tenants' rents to keep up with what the assessor's now doing and overvaluing our properties, and we want to retain, the people who've been living here. So it's very alarming.
It is very alarming. And the funny thing, you mentioned this because I was going to bring this up on my national show on Thursday, but I was just reading an academic study which showed that small-time landlords are less likely to evict tenants. They have stronger relationships with their tenants, and they want to work with them. And I think that this is one of those things that could really start pushing small-time landlords who are just trying to cover their own bills, are not trying to exploit people. That could push them out of the rental market. And the thing that I also want to say is that typically the larger corporate landlords that operate as property management companies as well, they're a lot more difficult to work with than a small-time landlord.
Completely intolerant of people's personal circumstances.
Yeah. And it's, you can work things out with a small landlord. Not always. I mean, we know that there are bad small landlords. Please understand. And there are some good property management companies. I'm not saying that. Yeah. But very often the property management company is very concerned about having its own business practices. And if you don't tick all the boxes, you can't get housing. This could potentially eliminate whole areas, housing stocks for people who need housing, and could push people either into the suburbs or could push people into these, for example, these long-term stay hotels that are actually quite expensive, but that don't put people through the arduous process of applying for a place to live. But again, it could always lead to that greater concentration of housing in the hands, in the paws, the claws of major hedge funds that are only concerned. They're not organized. It's like the people who've taken over the Tribune. That corporation was a journalistic. That's a journalistic corporation with the mission of providing journalism. We can argue about its practices and its views, but those corporations exist for a purpose. Hedge funds are about short-term profits.
They serve a public interest, and the hedge funds don't. It's a short-term private interest at the expense of everybody else, and continuing this class divide and literally turning the middle class into like serfdom.
Yeah, and that's been my biggest fear, that we are moving into a kinder, gentler, and far more technological serfdom, and that you will have a place to live. But you might even have security, if you're on a private development, but you are going to be at the whim of whatever corporation owns your job, owns your medical care, owns where you live, and owns the public and private security. And I don't like that one bit.
I agree with you. It's very alarming.
It is.
That Kagi is suddenly... And I wonder what's influencing him in making this just going.
Well, it is Cook County. Yeah. It's like, look, I've talked to people who are in like the so-called anti-gentrification movements, and I've heard them say, look, there are so-called anti-gentrification groups out there that are actually pro-gentrification, but they use word salad and policies that seem on the surface to be anti-gentrification. But to basically shift zoning on housing stocks and that sort of thing. So again, this is really disturbing, because if you're going to say, well, these landlords are being subsidized by the homeowners and using that talking point to sound progressive,
right?
You're not considering what happens when you basically make things absolutely miserable for the landlords. who are renting homes to people who
Who
are
have an
not able
investment
to
in their,
purchase them.
and they have an investment in their property, and they want to keep
Yeah,
the good landlords want to keep housing affordable, so
yeah,
long as they've got good tenants.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how like it's being wiggled back and forth depending on the agenda of the person examining the problem.
Yeah, exactly. A real concern, and yeah, a real concern. I did also want to mention that we're having major problems in the city with getting people around. Certainly, public transportation is operating, but there's been a major decrease in the number of Uber and Lyft drivers. And it's just basically, essentially, we've got 50% less. Ride-hail drivers out there. It's fallen from April of 2019 to April of 2021. Actually, no, it's 60% drop. Many of these people, apparently, the Uber and Lyft drivers, they weren't getting any business. So I think many of them left the city, may have just gone somewhere else. But some of them also switched to food delivery, which they've said is actually a more affordable and less irritating way of making a living.
And this is surprising because so much of the gig worker economy is I know so many people that were turning to driving for rideshare because of the regular employment and economic situation because of COVID. Now the ride sharing industry is being impacted by this. I'm going to pull up the screen to this story.
I think
Please keep talking.
Yeah. So the cost of getting a ride share has really gone up, and the wait times have in some cases just, you're waiting 12, 13, 15 minutes to get a ride share where, usually you were usually able to get them within 3 or 4 minutes. Now, the other thing that's very interesting is there are now only 1,000 active cabbies in the city of Chicago.
1,000 active cabbies. I would imagine so many cabbies left the taxi cab industry to drive for ride sharing.
Yeah.
And now the ride share. I drove a cab for I think 3 weeks. They gave me this is many years ago, crappy vehicle with bald tires. I almost got into an accident. And my 3 weeks driving as a cabbie, as much as I enjoyed it because I liked meeting people and stuff, I understood why the taxi cab industry can't attract immigrants more. Yeah. Because normal Americans wouldn't want to tolerate the circumstances by which the cab companies and the dangerous cabs that they were giving to their cabbies to drive that you had to lease. But yeah, that's interesting. So now cab driver numbers are down, and now the ride sharing. Well, continue. I'm sorry. I'm just scrolling.
Yeah, along. No. The thing is with cab driving, for example, is that your cab driver, unless you own your own cab. Right. The cab driver would pay a lease, and the lease could be, and I know that 10, 15 years ago, it was $52. It's probably it probably became a lot more than that. But you'd have the cab for 12 hours and you were on your own to make money. And if there was nobody, and if you didn't get any fares that night, well, you didn't get any fares that night. Somebody, a drunk, puked all over the back of your cab and you couldn't go out and drive. Too bad. You didn't, you still paid that lease.
Yeah.
And the thing is also that many cab companies did not adapt to technology. And when Uber came out, and Uber still had Uber Cab, and I don't know if they still have it, but Uber came out, and it was, it was a game changer for everybody. The cab driver was assured of getting, or the Uber driver was assured of getting a fare, getting paid. It may not have been very much, but they were assured of getting paid. The driver, there was a record on both driver and passenger. And it also meant that the drivers didn't have to stick to to well-off or busy areas. People living in smaller neighborhoods were able to get cabs to get a car service quickly because there was no risk for the driver who would normally have to drive around an empty neighborhood. That's not profitable. People always wondered why only certain areas in Chicago you could get a cab. The reason is that the driver only has a certain amount of time to make money. And there's no point in driving around neighborhoods where there's nobody trying to hail a cab. Nobody's going to order a cab. You're going to congregate in parts of the city where the action is. But that meant, depending on where you lived, and this is going back to the mid 2000s, I could wait an hour or more living in South Logan Square before it gentrified, before a cab would show up. And the cab companies never, got a hold of that technology. Uber and Lyft did. So, but now there's a pickle because these drivers are gone. Many of them have switched to delivery. People are really happy with delivery. They like having things delivered. People are not going to the office because many of them are now working from home, at least part-time, if not permanently. So this is going to be a massive sea change in the city of Chicago, which, there's already one sea change and now there's another one. And transportation, I think, has just gotten a little bit more difficult.
The article says, I've got it up here on screen now, this one gentleman that they spoke with, Rosales, says he will return to his taxi business eventually, especially if the food delivery business slows down because more people want to dine in. I wonder if we're just going to see this trend change as the city is reopened and more people are going out and people aren't needing, food delivery at home. They're relying more on cabs and ride shares to get them out to dining out.
Well, I will say that some of the food delivery companies are also expanding into grocery and sundry deliveries.
Okay.
So, like DoorDash delivers groceries. They even work with companies like Mercado, which it's a network of online delivery services for independent grocers. So I have a feeling that we're just going to see a lot. We're going to see food delivery, grocery delivery, parcel delivery, all wrapped up into one. And I also want to point out that a lot of restaurants right now are having extreme difficulty finding employees. I was just talking to somebody the other day. There's a bar. It opened up. They have a kitchen, but they've had to, on more than one occasion, I guess, close the kitchen because the only person who shows up is the chef, and he can't handle it.
Jeez.
Because they can't find anybody to work in the kitchen. And by the way, they're paying a decent hourly wage. Mm-hmm. So I think that, I just think we're not going to have a full idea of the impact and what things are going to look like until 2022. It's just going to take that little bit of extra time to figure out what all this is looking like. But for right now, for people who I don't have a car, if you're trying to rely on the public transportation, which is not always the safest option, and it's not always the most convenient, rideshare made sense, but not at those prices, and not if I have to wait a long time for a car. As I said, there are a lot of people who do rely on rideshare for some very important reasons, not just convenience. It's a change. We'll see what happens with it. Two more stories I wanted to bring up. First of all, many people in Chicago have been complaining about slow mail deliveries. This has been going on for a while.
I'm going to add to this after you cover this. So you share the detail. My expectation was an email communication with Postmaster Prater the day that she resigned, and I saw the newspaper. I actually found out that she resigned in the newspaper after receiving an email communication from her that directed me to this new postmaster, Eddie. I don't know what his last name is, but you share the story. Then
Eddie Morgan Jr.
Eddie Morgan Jr.
To say, but we've had a real issue. I mean, there's been problems with the Postal Service across the country. Chicagoans have been complaining. People aren't getting their mail for days or even weeks. And
this is complicated by the Postal Service reporting on delivery tracking and that your package has been delivered so they can improve their metrics, and then you don't get your package for 4 or 5 days later. That's what I was in communication with Prater for, because this isn't the first time this has happened to me.
Yeah.
This is ongoing. I've switched to shipping UPS and asking people to ship to me UPS because this Postal Service, I used to be so much of an advocate for them in the past, Lainie, because I believe in the importance of the service, the fact that they had a union behind them, but now they just seem to be enabled by the fact that they've got job security, their union protecting them, and they can just put whatever information out that they want and deliver in whatever time frame that they want, and it really shakes your faith in the institution of the Postal Service when it's been reported, I think, on a national level, not just in Chicago,
but
all across the country. They will report your packages delivered.
Yep.
And then when they report it's delivered and you don't have it, you don't have the means in case your package was actually stolen to file a claim, because they'll turn around and say, oh, well, we show that it was delivered on this date and time. It's like, no, it wasn't. And in my situation, it was like 4 or 5 days until my package showed up. But I was pretty much, I was convinced that they reported it delivered to cover their asses. And when it took 4 days that it was missing, I thought it was lost. And I was asking Postmaster Predator, how am I supposed to file a claim now that you guys claim it was delivered? And clearly it wasn't, because I have a security cam in my vestibule that showed exactly the time that they claimed it was delivered, and it wasn't. So, but this is happening to everybody all over the city.
And it's been discussed that the post office has been under a lot of pressure. It appears, they're expected to fund their pensions, up front, and that there are a lot of special interests that would like to eliminate the Postal Service, even though it was something that was a very important part of the founding of the United States. And
this is what DeJoy was doing when Trump put DeJoy. I mean, I think DeJoy had some ties with private shipping and delivery services. So you put the fox in charge of the hen house.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't even think Postal Service was, it was suffering, but it wasn't as bad until DeJoy went in. And then they started, removing sorting machines and all this stuff that internally people were saying, why are we doing this? It's just damaging the company. So that privatization was supposedly going to be the solution to the problem that DeJoy was creating.
There were also issues, and this was back in the mid-2000s. I actually talked to a guy who worked for the Postal Service, and they had started the delivery tracking service, where you could actually, they would confirm delivery. And the problem is that the postal employees were they were carrying around these little meters that they would use to scan to make sure that the delivery tracking was tracked. The problem was that they were expected to keep to their normal benchmarks, their normal schedule, but they had that nobody at the post office felt that it was necessary to account for the extra time spending in processing the confirmed delivery packages and letters. And so then they got mad at the postal workers, and they said, well, we're going to make you check in at certain points so we can make sure during the day you're actually where you need to be on your route. So they started putting up on certain mailboxes a barcode, so the postal workers would have to scan the barcode by a certain time, or they could be, they could get into trouble. And I remember watching postal carriers running to scan these bars, because we had one on our mailbox, and it turns out that they didn't even account that in addition to having to do the confirmed delivery scan, now they had to scan something else, and never at any time did they add the time that it was going to take for these extra steps to what was expected of a postal worker during the day. So it sounds like mismanagement goes way back.
Oh yeah.
So in any case, so I thought I would mention that as well. And then finally, we know what's happened with the Chicago Tribune, and the Tribune, as well as many of its sister publications around the country, been taken over by an investment fund, and the investment fund is known for basically hollowing out newsrooms and trying to maximize profits for investors.
Alden Global.
It's what we're at right now is there's been this massive walkout, and we've seen most of the columnists of the Tribune, not all, but most of them are gone. John Cass. For all
this week they were talking about Cass leaving,
and
this was
Heidi Stevens.
This was a buyout. So if I'm understanding it correctly, the reporters weren't let go for reasons that they, that had to do with their the quality of their work. They were offered buyouts because eventually they knew that they were going to be cut. Is that how it worked?
That's my understanding. But basically they have lost a lot of their talent. They very columnists, and I'm not a fan of John Cass, for example, but there are people who connected with him in this city. And now you're going to have people in the city of Chicago who have lost their columnists. They've lost the expertise. They've lost that trust. And the thing is that we've been complaining for a long time that media has a lot of issues. And one of the issues has been cutting corners, particularly when it comes to local reporting, when people are no longer on local beats, when you don't have fact checkers, when you don't have professional editors, when all of your photographers are freelancers. This is bad for local communities. It is bad for journalism in general. And I really do fear the consequences of this down the line.
Well, I've got the article. I mean, we talked before the show about this was the Rob Feeder column talking about the different columnists that were bought out, but on a larger level, we can talk about Alden, who is going to be gutting the Tribune by offering these buyouts, as it has many other newsrooms across the country. And I think Alden Global is a hedge fund.
I believe so.
Yeah, they're buying these news organizations, and ultimately, a long established mainstay like the Tribune is literally, I'm fearful, going to become like the Sun Times. No offense to the Sun Times, but that one has literally been like just whittled to the bones. Yeah. As far as the coverage that they give. You look, you go to a newsstand, you see both of them. The newspapers today are like as thin as the ad sections that they used to include, when the newspapers were this thick. And I understand it's a completely changing world as far as people getting their news online, but this doesn't even have to do with like the delivery, the delivery model as far as where you're getting the news when you don't have the right qualified people behind the scenes, because Alden is slashing the talent in the newsrooms. It's going to be, what's the agenda of what is being passed along in newsrooms if you don't have journalists actually researching all the facts and stuff with the experience.
Yeah. And again, the nice thing about a paper newspaper, a paper magazine, or a broadcast television or radio show, a news show, is that it's not dependent on somebody's algorithm. It's not dependent on what it goes into a person's quote unquote feed. It is, the news of the day is presented right there. Take it or leave it. Yeah. And you can make your way through that news. You listen, by listening, by watching, by reading, but you will be exposed to all the news if you're thorough about it, rather than just what is to your interest. I told the story on Hardland's Civically Minded, my national show. I didn't realize that Great Britain has plans to expand its nuclear stockpile by 40%. Over the next 10 years. And the only reason I found that out was because I subscribed to The Economist, and I was actually reading it cover to cover, and I found the little story in there. I became indignant. Well, is somebody covering the story up? I went online, looked it up. No, the international media was covering it, but none of my algorithms or feeds in social media were delivering up that story to me.
And it's such a major story.
It is, but the point is that, that was what scared me. And I remember mentioning this to some friends of the family, and right there, the husband and wife said together, that's it, we're subscribing to The Economist, because they realized the importance of being exposed to all the news in one place rather than the bits and pieces that we get fed. And that's really hard because we've gotten very used to this convenience of having notifications and stories coming right in. You get you get the alerts and that sort of thing. And that's great, but there's a whole lot of news that we're missing, and we're going to be missing even more now that the Tribune's been gutted. We've lost, the Chicago Defender is no longer a paper publication. Now the Tribune, this is just a very disturbing trend. It has really harmed this country, and I'm very afraid of what's to come.
Quoting from the article, Alden's reputation as a vulture fund, and they are, had set off a frantic effort by union members and Tribune publishing newsrooms. Their organizer, Baltimore Sun education reporter Liz Bowie, dubbed the effort Project Mayhem. The journalists tried to secure potential buyers in numerous Tribune markets who embraced the public-minded aspirations of journalism, including the Maryland philanthropist and hotel magnate Stuart Bainum Jr. After a process marked by intrigue and whiplash, Alden dashed all those hopes. The hedge fund already held a 30% stake in the Tribune. Alden's founder, Randall Smith, sits on the Tribune's board, as do other directors with close ties to Alden. Smith's protege, Heath Freeman, oversees Alden's previous newspaper holdings and is the fund's president. Both men keep low public profiles. I wonder why.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is this:
Ugh.
is that I mean, you and I have discussed this. Not for profit. There are several, like Block Club Chicago and Chicago Reader here in the city of Chicago, are not for profit, and there can be some really good. That can be a good thing because they can take in donations. But again, if you're dependent on donations, you've got to consider: are you beholden then to your donors rather than to your advertisers or your investors? Somewhere along the line, integrity is going to get jacked.
I think it already has been, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, we've crossed that threshold.
Yeah.
Now it's like, putting a bandage on a hemorrhage.
And do we really want a situation where the only people who can do commentary like we do, or
Exactly.
or original reporting or whatnot, the only people who can do that are either youngsters who are willing to work for a pittance, and they'll do that for a few years before they are forced to move on to make more money, or people of independent means, people from wealthy backgrounds who have wealthy spouses or partners who are willing to subsidize a journalism career.
Yeah.
These possibilities are not attractive to me. And I think, it's again, people's behaviors have shifted, things have shifted, the way we go about our lives has shifted, and unfortunately, we're seeing an unintended consequence of convenience.
Well, the convenience that the shifting landscape of digital media has provided us. We've got the pros and we've got the cons, and this is part of the cons. I remember Huffington Post many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They'd let anybody publish or report on their platform, and they wouldn't pay them anything. So this is also started to slowly whittle away at the fact that journalists need to make a living because they put a lot of time into investigating stories. And I think I've said this before on this show too. We're just commentators. I mean, I admire journalists. I wish I had the time to go out and investigate and pursue these leads and stuff, but we can't comment on these things without those that are really doing the hard work that need to be paid for those efforts. That as you start downsizing newsrooms like this, you're not going to have people getting the actual facts. And we don't want this to devolve into people just reporting opinions all the time without the facts that we can present to show, what drives our opinions.
Yeah. It is serious. It is a genuine concern. I'm hoping we continue to have this conversation. We're doing, I think, the best that we can to try and amplify and share stories and offer our commentary and ideas and resources so people can do their own research. But it's not a replacement for old-fashioned investigative journalism or the kind of reporting that you get when you have a team of newsmen and newswomen who have contacts and sources and are attending city meetings and are there to bring the facts and to describe what's going on.
Aren't tossing softballs or worrying about offending the establishment that is gutting the newsrooms or
they simply don't have time to do this.
Yeah.
They're not going out to meetings. They're not going out to commissions and licensing boards. They can't be working 24/7, and they're sending reporters out with their cell phones to take pictures. Rather than having a professional photographer there. It's just there's nobody to fact check. We know that copy editing is important, and if you're a writer, it's very difficult to edit your own work. But here we are.
Yeah. Left-leaning Huffington Post is what led the charge. Isn't that ironic?
Well, Arianne Huffington was a conservative. I know
that, but she branded herself as a left liberal. I was out in Los Angeles when Huffington Post was getting popular, and suddenly she was, it's like most neoliberals. They're I don't want to offend any Republicans or conservatives in our audience, but the whole, neoliberals are essentially Republican light, and they are embracing more business agendas, more Wall Street, more banking agendas, while pretending that they're liberal or they're left-leaning, towards the interests of the common working class Americans. So, at the time that she emerged in Los Angeles, this was, I was out there from 96 through 2007. It was around the time of Air America Radio, and when people were, there was kind of a strengthened left journalistic platform emerging on Air America Radio and Huffington Post to kind of combat what was happening during the Bush administration and the Iraq war. But I think that there were a lot of opportunists that were jumping into the fray at that time, to especially Arianna Huffington and what Huffington Post ended up.
Well, she wrote a book back in 1974 that was an anti-feminist screed. Her name at the time, I believe, was Stasinopoulos, and she also wrote for Imprimis, which was I forget the name of the college, but it's Hillsdale College's magazine. And then she was married to a guy named Michael Huffington, who they eventually divorced, and then she changed. But the idea of you're running a platform, you're running an online news platform based on people's unpaid labor.
Yeah, right. Slave labor, and she's profiting off of it. It wasn't like Huffington Post wasn't running ads and making money to support Arianna and the staff while they were, running the stories of everybody else without paying them. So it's just, it's shameful.
It is.
Well, we're at the 122 mark. I don't mind talking long, but we want to move on, and I don't want to.
It's Monday night, so
it's Monday night. And listen, Lainie, anything else you want to kind of wrap up with here before we bring our show to a close?
I would ask people again. The whole thing about being prepared for disasters is making it easier on your community, because you're taking care of yourself and your family and your close by neighbors. And again, that's something that we could all do our part on, and it's for your own well-being, but also for the well-being of people around you. It's a very community-minded way of thinking about things. And again, people have questions, send them on. I'll try and answer them for you.
Well, yeah. Well, Lainie will answer them for you, and we also have all of the research and resources she gave down there. I was pointing in our show notes. Hey, we had a good turnout tonight. We had a lot of people participating in the live chat. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And please remember, if you haven't already, like and subscribe the channel. Please share it with your friends that also want to keep on top of what's happening locally here in Chicago. We're going to cover news, politics, the arts, culture, hopefully bring some of our viewers in that have interesting stories to share. We have our rotation of co-hosts here, but I also like bringing guests on. So please contact me, Jerry at chicagocorner.tv for news, tips, and stories. If it's happening on the streets, you'll hear about it here on Chicago Corner. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. Lainie, again, thanks for this is our second broadcast together, I believe.
It is. And remind everybody, every Thursday, 5 p.m. Central Time, I'm on Hard Lens Media doing the National Civically Minded Show.
And tomorrow night, we've got Jose Requena scheduled to come on to do another episode of Fear and Loathing in the Windy City. We tentatively have Jamal Green booked for Friday. We had technical difficulties last Friday. I'm hoping that that's all sorted out so we can bring him on Friday to bring us up to date on the developments with the Majesti All-Stars Youth Center that's being proposed, and the ongoing feud with Mayor Lightfoot and the city on that. We've got some good stuff to cover and talk about with Jamal when he returns on Friday. So thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. Stay safe out there. And as always, good night, Chicago.
Good night, Chicago.